I'm going to take it up a little bit of a level here, and what I'm hoping to do with this presentation, I'm not going to talk about Box. I really would prefer to talk about some of the opportunities and trends going forward, ways that you can think a little bit differently about opportunities, particularly using technologies like mobile and SaaS and cloud. I'm going to also talk about some of the challenges that presents and some of the things that perhaps you should be thinking about as you develop your roadmap toward modernization and looking at new technology adoption. What I will tell you, how many people are familiar with Box already? So about half, that's great. So for those of you that don't know, I'll give you the one-liner description and then we'll move straight into the material. We are a cloud-based solution. We're a SaaS provider for collaboration, helping teams to work better together, whether they be on a mobile device or at a desktop, and whether the team members happen to be inside or outside the company. So we're collaboration and file sharing, if you will, in the cloud. So having said that, that'll kind of give you an idea about why some of the topics I'm talking about are relevant. When we look at what really matters from a current trend perspective, a current user adoption perspective, and look at how that can impact how we build products and services, it's these three trends that we're all dealing with that, frankly, are the key drivers to what we're trying to build and what kind of problems we're trying to solve. It's pretty clear that end users are bringing a very different set of expectations into the workplace, particularly the younger workforce. They're used to using tools at home that they like to work with, that look good, that allow them to interact freely with information and with each other. And a lot of those expectations are infiltrating the workplace. So the systems that we've typically prescribed for our users are not necessarily the most well-loved by some of the workforce. And so what we're trying to do is provide alternatives that are more user-accepted, therefore easy to adopt, but yet encompass a lot of the things that we need to have in a productive work tool. So scale, reliability, security, and of course the ability to get actual work done that matches business needs. There's no question that this is changing how we as individual users work, but it's definitely changing the IT landscape as well. And I think the prior speaker talked a lot about the need to be ahead of the curve, if you will, to really engage with the business, to understand their needs, and to be anticipating how IT infrastructure and frankly the landscape we build can meet those challenges head on. I think that's a fundamental principle of where IT needs to be today. We as IT leaders need to be thinking about how we can say yes, how we can empower, how we can engage, better understand the problems we're solving, and not make any trade-offs to the corporate security, protection, insight, and oversight that we all need to have. One of the most interesting things about cloud, I think, is that it does move us from a bit of a different model than we've seen in the last decade. There was absolute truth about, let's say even the last 5 years ago and beyond, that you did tend to get a better answer when you bought from a single vendor. You would effectively identify your key pain points. So say it was CRM and you were looking at Siebel, and Siebel now being part of Oracle, you effectively would buy and compromise to some degree on the Oracle stack because at least it all worked together, and at least you had one throat to choke, right, when something went wrong. And what's happening is that we're moving away, thankfully, from the absolute necessity to buy in a stack technology way. The cloud has really changed the game. And it isn't the cloud alone. It's the cloud coupled with modern technology, modern programming languages, more system openness because of those modern programming languages, therefore an easier way to integrate disparate systems and an easier flow of information between systems. So you take all that together, and what you end up with is an ability to start looking at best-of-breed solutions, which is what we've wanted to do for a very long time, but has been very difficult to deploy and actually implement. And you can start now to look at the solution that's going to best fit the need, whether it's NetSuite for finances or Workday for HR or Zendesk for customer support or Jive for social business software, coupled with a lot of the technologies that are already in your IT landscape. And that's the other thing that I really want to mention is that this whole idea of cloud computing is a new way to evaluate new solutions to bring into the workplace. It's not necessarily about throw everything away and start over. You can't de-invest in the things that are providing value in the organization, that have been validated or help you support regulatory compliance, but you do need to find a way to look at new technologies to bring into the mix that better power the workforce and bridge the gap between the on-premise systems that you need to maintain and the way for people to work better together on mobile devices and so on and so forth. So this isn't about a whole hog move to the cloud, but it's about a new way of evaluating technologies that you can bring into the mix. And I think some of the things about cloud technology are a little bit undersung. So clearly, a lot of the technologies being built in the last, say, 5, 6, 7 years, let alone the ones that have been built in the last 2 or 3, is that they typically are built for that changing set of user expectations. They are built and meant to be simple, meant to be solutions that humans like, that they'll actually use and adopt. And I think there's something really valuable about that. If you consider for a moment that if what you pay for is only half utilized, it's a horrible waste of money. It's also a horrible waste of resource. So if you can actually look at adoption as a form of ROI, then you've got to get high rates of adoption of the software that you decide to invest in, which means that it's got to be simple enough for people to actually like. And fortunately, that's a trend of some of the newer technologies. The second thing I think is really undersung about cloud is that it is a much lower risk for trying solutions before you buy them. It's a little bit of a myth to say that you can simply plug in an account ID and go with cloud technology, but it's almost that simple. At least you're not procuring, pre-configuring, and standing up all sorts of hardware and testing compatibility on operating systems and other related technologies in your data center before you can even pilot, which is typically the case with on-premise software. So I think there's a true advantage in when you're looking to new technologies that cloud affords you the opportunity at a very low price, often free, opportunity to test without doing any pre-provisioning or hardware configuration or any of those kinds of things, to try before you buy, and to make sure that it's actually what you want before you start an investment and or getting your users engaged in it. And that's something that I think is very undersung, as I said, in kind of the cloud model. And the other thing that I think cloud enables very easily, and it's not to say that you can't do this with on-prem technology, it's just a lot harder, is the idea of being able to work anywhere. So we're all entering an era of, and we're at various phases of, deploying mobility. How we deal with BYOD, how we deal with people wanting to get work done on mobile devices is something that we're seeing as a future trend, today trend, getting more and more prevalent as time goes forward. And so the idea of untethering the user from their desk and allowing them to access not just email and calendar, but corporate data to partake in decision-making, to actually contribute to workflow, to review and approve documents that matter to the business, to be able to be a contributing member of a productive team while not at their desk, in an airport lounge, on a train, while they're on vacation, maybe, perhaps while they're visiting family or somewhere else other than at their desk, behind your firewall, behind the perimeter, tethered to your corporate network. So mobile is an answer to that, and cloud is a very key enabler to making that possible. It's not that you can't have somebody VDI in or VPN in to your secure network from a mobile device, but by the way, you're typically giving access to the same crappy desktop experience that they get on their laptop at their desk that way. And there's a huge difference in looking at technologies that truly take advantage of and were designed for mobile use versus giving tunneled-in access to a desktop application on a mobile device. And that's really speaking back to that kind of software simplicity and appealing to what users want to use day to day in the workplace. And the thing that's driving this change, again, is really about mobile. And I don't mean mobile in the sense of a smartphone or a tablet, but mobile being I can do my work anywhere. You know, work is not necessarily a place you go anymore. It's a thing you do wherever you may happen to be. And I think that's a really compelling concept that cloud makes that much easier than we've seen with other technologies. And so to look at mobile as somewhat of the catalyst of the future, I think is a really important point. And that's where I want to try to spark some thoughts and ideas in you about how to think perhaps a little bit differently about what the landscape might look like a year from now, 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. This may not be an overnight sensation, but we're certainly getting there. And mobile is starting to become the de facto work platform in many areas. I certainly don't think that's true everywhere. It's getting to be more true in more forward-thinking companies, but we have a long way to go before we get away from just mobile as an email and calendaring device and to get it to be a true productive work platform. And that's not just about us companies adopting, it's also about the technology itself evolving. But look at this statistic, more than 1.3 billion workers on mobile devices. This is not consumers. So we're seeing a mass shift of adoption in mobile devices that people want to use for work purposes. And interestingly, we're seeing a mass outpacing of purchases of tablet computing, and this is just on the iOS side of things, relative to iPhones and other kinds of devices. And that also affects what we're seeing in the workplace. The tablet actually turns out to be a much better approximation of a work platform than a smartphone, which just has too little real estate and too small a keyboard. But we're starting to see tablets being a work creation platform as well as an access platform. And I think we actually have very interesting opportunities to look at mobile as not just another platform to support in the mix of existing applications, but as a catalyst for change, as a way to reimagine or transform some of our business processes to think differently. And I'm going to give you a bunch of examples, but I'm going to give you one in particular that I find particularly compelling. And it happens to be one of our customers, but we're a small part of the puzzle that they've solved. This is a company in America called Sunbelt Rentals. I don't expect any of you to have heard of them before. They lease very large construction and destruction equipment. So think of earth-moving equipment, cranes, wrecking balls, scaffolding, et cetera, et cetera. And they're the number 2 in their market. The number 1 is a company called United Rentals, which is quite large, and most folks in America have seen their trucks on highways and the like. They sell exactly the same stuff, or I should say they lease exactly the same stuff. All the tractors and equipment that they lease are exactly the same, made by the same people. So how do you differentiate? Well, it's either on price, on service, margins, all of the above. And so they took a very unique approach to how to change the way they looked into operating their business. They decided to use mobile as the key platform for their entire workforce. They built an application from scratch that shows every single performance indicator of the company in that application, and you see what you're entitled to see based on who you are and what role you play. So if you're a sales rep at this company, you can see your accounts and your territories and dig in to see what kind of the lease time to fulfillment is and what the cash due is and all those kinds of lovely things. And if you're a sales manager, great, you see your whole sales territory. But what's really interesting is if you're an executive at this company, you can see all the sales and revenue data, but you can also see the operational data around things like margin, around overall time to fulfill leases to their customers, about customer success ratings, about operational metrics on the budget, and so on and so forth. And so what they were able to do with that level of transparency at the fingertips, no matter where those people were, in the field, in the office, traveling, wherever, was they started to really recognize how they could start to tweak certain factors of their business to get better margins and to get better time to lease fulfillment, which gave better customer satisfaction ratings. And it's great that they now have the opportunity and have accomplished that they have a better profit margin than their number 1 competitor, and they've got a faster time to lease fulfillment and a better customer service rating. But the complete surprise to them in this was that giving visibility to the amount of idle equipment that was not leased, that was just sitting around wasted, was an opportunity for them to create a new revenue stream for the business. And so they found a way to sublease that equipment to dramatically reduce the amount of idle equipment they had sitting around. And that's produced a whole nother profitable revenue stream for them. And they used mobile as the only way to do this. There isn't really a desktop version of this app. So underneath that is tying into a whole bunch of their systems that are really important for running their business. That's a really inventive way of looking at mobile to reimagine how to do business in a new way that had a dramatic effect on how they perform. And there's a whole bunch of ways to think about that. I think some of you have seen me use some. Again, this is not about throwing away everything you have already, but it is certainly looking forward at what you can bring in to modernize IT, to meet the needs of the business, and to help users work in a better and more productive way. So you've got to be looking at mobile. There's no question. And the number of enterprise relevant applications on mobile is doubling every year or faster. You've got to go from the kind of IT prescribed model to something that is user enabling. We can't afford to have BYOA, where users bring their own apps as they wish and use whatever they want because they can bypass IT. It puts corporate information at risk, and it certainly isn't the way we want to run our businesses. You also have to think about new architectures. You know, cloud is a new thing to add into some of our on-premise systems, right? So we've got to think about ways to make those work together. Can you take information that's perhaps locked away behind the firewall and make it more accessible and shareable and operate on it better if it's enabled by cloud delivery to mobile devices, external parties, et cetera? Moving from kind of that vertical stack vendor lock-in model to more of a best-of-breed choice model, but integrating those in a way that makes sense for the business. And a lot of this does require a new mindset. I don't doubt at all that there are plenty of you in the room that are not comfortable with the idea of putting corporate data in the cloud. That's not an atypical reaction. But you have to take the time to understand the advantages that cloud might give you and at least be willing to have the dialogue to understand whether it can be safe or not. There's a variety of vendors in on-prem software solutions. There's a variety of vendors in cloud solutions. We all do it differently. So you've got to make sure that you're finding the partners that are safe enough, that are secure enough, that give you enough control over the data that you own in the cloud so that it can be a viable solution to get you to more modern solutions. Moving more from the focus on technology to more the focus on the information and how it can flow more is how to build a roadmap to get there. Love this quote from Steve Ballmer, you can't throw out all your software and just start over. And clearly that's true. But if you only imagine the starting point you're at today and take very small incremental baby steps, you're not going to go very far. You've got to think much bigger than that. And so I would encourage you to think for a moment not about your existing IT landscape, but pretend for a second that you could throw it away and start all over. What would it look like if you had your druthers and could paint it from scratch? And it might look entirely cloud-based, it might not, it might be a blend, but if you can at least dream a little bit bigger, then you've got now kind of a course to chart of how to get as close to that vision as you can. And the way to think, I think, about that vision is to, let me skip ahead here, is to first and foremost focus on where you are today. I think it's very important to realize what contribution and frankly what freedom IT has within your current corporate landscape to change things, to drive meaningful change, to look at new opportunities, to modernize the business, to look for new ways to gain revenue, to do what a Sunbelt or a Southwest is doing. You've got to recognize where you're starting from, because in the reality of things, there are plenty of us that are in more of that cost center maintenance place today. Even if that's not where we want to be, it might be where we're starting. And there are others that are much more at a strategic advantage position where they are, in fact, looked to by the CEO to drive change. But you got to know where you're starting from to realistically chart a course to where you want to go. So that's kind of step number one. And step number two is to recognize how aggressive you can afford to be given the corporate environment you work in, the regulatory environment you work in, what the government has as far as governance over you that you have to be aware of. And there are companies like Box, like Pandora, there's a bunch of us that are relatively young and got the luxury of starting from scratch. If you were a company that was founded in the last 10 years, you had the luxury of starting with cloud, which is a pretty nice place to start. Just to talk about Box for a moment, I don't have a single IT person working on maintaining internally used applications. Not one. We are 100% cloud. Every application we use is in the cloud, so that all of my IT resources are spent doing what they're supposed to do, which is servicing our customers and making sure that our service is available at least 3 nines of the time, and that we've got the right kind of security setting and scale planning and so on and so forth. That's exactly what I want them focused on. Just as you should want your IT people not maintaining software or maintaining hardware or whatever it may be that isn't at the heart and the sweet spot of what business you're trying to run. So the idea of figuring out, can you be super aggressive, or can you be as aggressive as the pace of business will let you? Kind of in that more moderate ground, right? Be opportunistic. Look at new areas of development or growth. Look at new device types. Look at new applications and figure out where you can get a win. And start there. And oftentimes that may mean taking new technology and integrating it with legacy systems to marry the data to have a more holistic view of what's going on. That's okay too. And frankly, there's plenty of organizations globally that are more in this conservative side of things. Most government entities around the world are a little more conservative, a little slower to move. Classified information, high risk privacy data is oftentimes going to put you in a more conservative category if that's the heart of what you do. But I think if you can recognize how aggressive you can afford to be and where you're starting from, then you can start to chart a course to where you want to go. And so then that third piece is, as you're looking at new services and technology to adopt, clearly you have to apply the same kinds of checklist items that you've always looked at. It's got to be safe, it's got to be secure, you've got to be betting on the right vendor who's going to be there for you. All the service terms and what have you have to meet your requirements. Clearly it's got to help you solve a real business problem. But start to look at, can you look at a cloud first type of environment? Does it give you more agility? Does it let you try at a lower risk? Does it give you a better cost equation? Does it let you eliminate costs elsewhere in the organization? And oftentimes some of the cloud technologies out there can do that for you. Secondly, does it work on any mobile device? Because while we've got iOS and Android and Windows phones and Blackberries today, who knows what the device of 5 years from now is? And who knows what the mix of the ones we have today is going to be? So you've got to be thinking ahead of how mobile computing is going to continue to infiltrate the business and look for solutions that are going to be flexible enough to afford you the opportunity to service that. And obviously, flexible but compliant, give you the opportunity to really maintain and enforce all of your current governance policies, and it's got to meet your security checklist. Like I said, every vendor's a little different. They do it differently. Make sure you're betting on the right one. And the last thing I'll say about this, and then we'll close here and hopefully have time for a question or two, is that you should expect to have a very, very deep and transparent conversation about security with any cloud or SaaS provider that you work with. If they can't tell you exactly how your data is going to be handled, how encryption is done, where that data lives, what controls you have, who owns the content, what happens if they go out of business. If they can't tell you everything you want to know, then don't run the other way, because they're clearly not going to be the trusted provider that you need them to be. They ought to be able to convince you that your data will be at least as safe as if it was on premise, if not more so, or why would you go there? So make sure that you're thinking about that security in a different way, right? Different questions to ask, but same assurance on the end of it. So my leaving for you is to kind of think about this plan. Think bigger about where you might want to go so that you can actually chart a course that's not just baby incremental steps from where you are, but recognize where you are today and how aggressive you can afford to be, and look at new applications and opportunities with a slightly different lens, but that still meet your business requirements.